Alright, so I haven't done like an update video in a while. I'm not even sure if I've really done one since the old Buick. I haven't really documented this build as thoroughly as I've done the old Buick, but uh, the engine's in there. Had the old engine mounts taken out, welded in the new ones. Um, Everything's in there. Fuel pump's hooked up, carburetor's all on there. It ran, but then upon closer inspection, I found out the starter and the flex plate were not really playing along very well, and that was because I decided to use uh, like regular, like maybe some grade 8 hardware or hardware store bolts instead of actual starter bolts, and this actually allows the starter to move, and it doesn't mesh with the gears on the flywheel or flex plate rather. So if you use actual starter bolts, they have the correct diameter shank that it aligns the starter where it needs to be. So if you go and you use just regular Joe Schmo hardware bolts, they don't work. You know, it'll mess up the flex plate, as I just learned. So I've got a new flex plate coming. That's why the engine looks like it's kind of sitting back a little bit, because I've actually pulled the transmission away. It's kind of hard to see down in there. This light. You can actually see where I've pulled the transmission away from the block a little bit down there. And that allowed me to unbolt the torque converter from the flex plate, slide the torque converter out of the way. Then I was able to actually get a wrench up in there and take the flex plate off without actually having to drop the transmission. This is a pain in the ass, but I got it done. Anyway, got the radiator in that came with the car, but I don't like this radiator because it just doesn't fit right. You see, I've got this flange bolted in, which is good, but then you come to the other side and it doesn't quite reach the radiator support on the other side. So I've had to make like some redneck bracket here just to hold it in place. It's not going anywhere. It doesn't change the you know, functionality of the radiator, but it looks like horse shit. But it'll work until I can buy a new radiator. There's one for like, I think it's 150 bucks, and I took the measurements, so I know what I need to order. This one is advertised as a radiator, like a replacement for these 50 to 54 Chevys, but it is too short. That's something you got to watch out for on eBay. You know, they're going to list it, you know, it says it fits this car, and they'll give these measurements, but you got to verify your measurements. That radiator does not fit. What else is going on? Once I get the right radiator in there, I'll finish the hoses. I had to get a new water pump. The water pump is a 327 from a 64 Corvette. And it had a 64 Corvette water pump. But when you have those Corvette water pumps, all your pulleys and everything have to be for the Corvettes. Like, it will not work with the pulleys from a later model small block Chevy. They don't line up. So I'm redoing all the pulleys, getting a short note, what they call a short water pump, and then get all the brackets. I'm gonna get air conditioning hooked up in here. So I've already picked out the brackets that I'm gonna use. I just haven't bought them yet. I'm going to try to use this bracket here on the manifold for an alternator. Have the alternator sitting kind of over here, and have the AC pump on the other side. I'm not even going to bother with power steering. That's just, you know, That would really take the fun out of driving these old cars. But anyway, got the front end sort of put back together. Got the grill back in. Got this fender replaced. Got the headlight back in it. When I got the car, the stock fender was all beat up and rusted through, and the owner had given me an extra fender. Well, that extra fender had a bunch of patches cut out and welded in, and somebody was trying to French the headlights, and they had cut the flange out of the center that the headlight bucket actually mounts to. And so I had no place to mount the headlight. So I did away with that fender. Got this one on eBay. Had it shipped from Kentucky. And got it just kind of primered. There's a few little dents and stuff in it. And I was able to get the headlight mounted back in here. One of the next things I want to tackle is I'm going to replace these little parking light turn signal housings because they're completely rusted through. Other than that, the grill is not in terrible shape, just some pitting. I can live with that. I got the front bumper sort of back on, just got some temporary bolts holding it in. I want to get a new front bumper altogether. All chrome, new chrome. Maybe have these re-chromed. They're not in terrible shape. It's just some of the chrome has peeled off. Anyway, starting to look like an old Chevy. We'll go back here. A huge shout out to Ronnie, obviously for the engine, but also for these sweet rims and tires. These are more of like a stock setup, whereas the other wheels and tires that came with the car they didn't look right. They were too skinny for this car. Although they were new tires, they weren't the right size. They just didn't look right. But, Ronnie hooked me up with these. They look great. Yeah, I like that. That is actually the stock color that this car was, according to the VIN plate and everything. It was like that seafoam green. Now it's destroyer primer gray. A little bit of black on the visor. White on the roof. Anyway, not a whole lot going on in the interior part. I do want to find the steering wheel that has the like a horn ring. That's definitely something I want. I took the clock out. I got Megan's photo in there where the clock is. Got all my gauges working, except for water temp. I don't have that hooked up yet. I will get a radio going at some point. They're just kind of expansive. I'll get some door panels. The door panels that came with the car they're starting to fall apart. They look pretty cool, or they did. I'm gonna keep the seats because the seats have been reupholstered. I mean, these things are like fantastic. Let me get some light. Light is always good. There you go. You can kind of see those seats. They're in really good shape. And it's got relatively new carpeting in here. Well, aside from some stains. But I've had to cut it up because that's where I've got to mount the shifter through the floor. And then I like the idea of the speaker and the kick panel there. And this one has it too. I've just taken the kick panel out. I've got some wiring to do, and then I can start tackling this, the roof. Try to get some sound deadening and insulation going on, and maybe find a company that can do the headliner, because that's a job I don't want to do. And let's see, you can see I finally got a rear axle in here. It's I think what they call it, 8-inch rear end, might mean 10-inch, from a 68 Camaro. And one of the issues I was having was I wanted to use the stock leaf springs because there's a kit out there for wider leaf springs. I think I've heard that they ride better, but that kit is like $700, and I'm trying to keep this on a low budget. So the idea was to use the stock leaf springs, and then I had to get relocate the actual axle perches, and I had to get the U-bolts for this axle. You can see they're kind of long, but I can cut those down. And then I used S10 shock mounts, the lower plates where the shock comes down and mounts to that plate there. Those are actually from an S10, or they're for an S10. They're actually brand new. And then I started redoing the brake lines. I was using the jack there to set my pinion angle. Once the pinion angle was set, then I can go back to the axle perch and weld those in place. And then that way, when I put the drive shaft in, I don't have any wobble or vibrations. Now that the axle is located where it goes, I can take a measurement from the pinion on the axle to the transmission, and I can have a drive shaft made. You can see I've started putting in the new cross member. Right now the transmission is just sitting on a piece of cardboard there. I found out the transmission mount, which I've got right here, that was bolted to the bottom of the transmission. The TH350. Problem is, this got a bolt in the center, and that mounting plate there is made for 2 bolts instead of just 1 bolt. So I bought a new transmission mount. It's on the way. And also, once I can get the flex plate put back in, mount my starter, I can get the transmission bolted back to the block, and then I can get that transmission mount put in, and that'll be done. Still got a few bolts to tighten up on this cross member, but she's almost done. As far as I know, the brake lines are all hooked up again. I just gotta tighten them and then bleed the brakes. The rear axle, the brakes were seized up, so I had to pry the drums off of them. I think that's one of them there. So she needs an entire rebuild. This is actually the heater. I took the heater box out from under the dash and actually split it open. Just a couple of screws hold that thing together. But your heater core sits inside here, and there's actually this little electric motor with this fan is mounted. I think it was actually mounted on the outside here, but the motor's toast. Oddly enough, I think it was actually, it says it was 13 volts, which is kind of odd because I was pretty sure this car was set up for 6 volts. It's 12 volt now, but I can get a new motor, get this fan mounted to the new motor, bolt it back in, and I've tried pressure testing this. Well, not really pressure testing. I filled the heater core with water to see if it leaks. It seems to hold water, but I don't have a way of putting any pressure on it to see if it leaks. But we'll find out if it leaks. There's a company out there that makes a new one, and it has a little electric fan built into it, and so that whole unit gets replaced, and I think it mounts to your stock housing here. So I'll definitely have heating, and then like I said, I'm working out the details for an air conditioner. But other than that, not much else going on with the car. And now the temperature's starting to plummet, so now it's frigid cold out here. Yep, that's it.